It's 2024. That's 11 years. 11. Yeah. Yeah, somewhere around there. Um, and I realized that for a little while, those first few years, I was in church every Sunday. And then I got a job that has a rotating shift and everything. Um, and I believe just about everybody knows what I do for work. Um, if you don't know, I work on the border. I'm an officer with Customs and Border Protection, and I've been with them for 7.5 years now. And yes, everything you hear on the news, not mainstream news, but actual truth and real news about the border is true. Absolutely true. And you're not even hearing the half of it. So for a long time, I was on this 12-hour schedule, which I was here every other Sunday. And fortunately, I got into the schedule this year, beginning of this year, which is a swing shift. So now I'm here every Sunday morning, and that was the reason why I was able to get on. Well, it was God that got me onto that shift first of all, because it's a very premium shift, and there's a lot of senior people above me that want to get onto that shift, and so you know that was a testimony itself to be able to get on that schedule for me being here every Sunday. And so I realized that majority of the years that I've been here, I've only been in church half the time. And I've struggled having relationships with people here in this church, and because of that time and everything. So I don't think that you guys have really know where I've come from. So I want to take a little time to introduce myself to you. I want to share parts of my testimony with you, because if I feel that God has placed some authority on me, that you probably should know a little bit who I am. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where I've come from, and then I have a little bit of a message based off of why I'm a Christian. And so pretty much the rest of my sermons for a little while are going to be why I decided to become a Christian. So I'm going to preach a little bit of the gospel. That's what I'm called to do, right? Preach the gospel. Amen. So yeah, I'm from here. I grew up here in New Orleans County. My mom and dad actually live in Newport Center. My sister lives in Newport Center. But I grew up here in Newport for a short while, and then we moved a couple places. We moved to Barton, Evansville, and then to Derby, Coventry. We moved when I was 8. We moved on to a dairy farm. My mom grew up as a dairy farmer. She grew up in Coventry, up on Hancock Hill. Yeah. Yep. And my dad, he grew up in Newport. Actually, if you know where Newport Daily Express is, that used to be all farmland. That actually belonged to my great-grandfather. And my grandparents married, and there's a blue house now down in that hollow off of Hill Street. The garage burnt down. They just rebuilt the garage, but that's where my grandparents lived for from the beginning of the war to when they moved away. My dad was raised in that place, and then interesting enough, we're sending our boys to UCA, right? UCA was the old high school, Newport High School, after the baby boomers came, right? And so my dad went to high school there. My grandfather was the janitor of that school. And I went there when it became an elementary school. I went there from K through 4 before we ended up moving to live on a farm. So I went there for school, and now my boys are there for school. So just something that I just find amazing. But anyway, I did spend some time in the church when I was little, But when we moved onto the farm, things just kind of went wonky. And our church life was non-existent for a while. And when I got a little bit older into my teens and everything, my grandmother used to go up to Newport Baptist, and so every once in a while, I had a school friend that went to that church too, and so I would catch a ride with him, and I would spend some time with my grandmother at Newport Baptist. So there was a little bit there, but my my faith was very small, and of course, as a teenager, I just don't understand. I wasn't really picking up everything. Um, so when I graduated from high school, I knew I didn't want to be a farmer. And like most teenagers in this area, especially at that time, was like, "Get me out of here!" And so I did. I went to college for a year. Um, I wanted to be a musician, and so I went to college. I got a little bit of a scholarship for music. I was wanted to be a music teacher, so I went to college for 1 year, and yeah, I fully went through the college experience in that year. I probably did 4 years of college experience, the experience, in that 1 year, and then I was politely not asked not to come back. Um, yeah, so I learned a lot after that year. That maybe I should try to figure out what I'm going to do, and my dad helped me out a lot with that actually, and I ended up auditioning to go into the Navy band, and and I passed the audition. They wanted me, and I spent 20 years in the Navy band as a trumpet player. Bet you some of you didn't know that. But I spent, my professional career, playing trumpet, and then I became an audio engineer as well, and used to sing a little bit, and so forth. But I love jazz. I was big into jazz, so I was constantly playing jazz and rock and roll, contemporary music and everything, which put me on the road a lot. So I got to travel extensively around the world, and man, I enjoyed every minute of it. Unfortunately, I enjoyed every minute of it in the wrong way. Yeah, um, the drinking. Yeah, again, I was a sailor, and what they say about sailors and alcohol and women in every port. Yeah, that was me. Took full experience of that, and but then I ended up meeting my first wife, Megan's mom, and she had her problems, and we both had our problems. We both had a lot of problems, and we were not in the best shape, relationship wise and everything. And I tried to be a good father, and I'm sorry. So our relationship wasn't the greatest, but we loved that little girl right there. And there came a time where my ex-wife's mental health issues and her alcoholism, became a little too much, and then I ended up leaving the marriage and everything. Um, well, I didn't even realize I was going to go this way, but excuse me. I kind of went crazy for a while and everything, and I tried to, you know, be as responsible as possible with my daughter and tried to be the best dad I could, even though it was a challenge. Not because it was a challenge for me. It was a challenge because my ex-wife, and I'm not trying to put her down or anything like that, but there were some barriers that were put up. She was very angry. She was very angry that I left, and so there were some challenges. There were some challenges there, and I presented some challenges on my own because I decided to look elsewhere and sometimes not be as responsible as a dad. And I was very selfish. I was very selfish. And at some point, I finally realized that my life is not going too well here. There came a time, and around 2004, that I actually had those suicidal thoughts come into my mind. And, I remember quite clearly saying to myself one day, well, that's an option. And thankfully, I didn't go along with that, of course. And I started to seek somewhere else. I started to seek other things because I knew this wasn't working for me, and it wasn't working for her. And I went from relationship to a relationship to a relationship, and so forth. Now, for my ex-wife, Megan's mom, she wasn't able. Well, I think she was able to at the end. She was able to seek the things that were higher, and she looked elsewhere to better herself and everything. But unfortunately, and I'm not sure, but I imagine the alcoholism. Imagine that ended up taking her. Yeah. Was she was 46, 47. She passed away at 47. But I ended up starting to seek. And I'll tell you, I even my younger days where I would seek those things out as well. And of course, I would not always come back to God, but I was seeking, and I would have those moments where it was all of a sudden it was just clear to me. But for some reason, I would still end up rejecting it anyway. And there were so many reasons why I would reject his presence, why I would reject his truth and his knowledge. And I remember one night clearly being out in the middle of the ocean on a ship, and 9:30 at night, because they button up everything at 10 o'clock at night. But I was out there, and I used to smoke. I spent 20 years smoking cigarettes, by the way. Thankfully, I quit in 2010, somewhere around there. But I was out there smoking, and there was a couple of us out there smoking, and it was just pitch dark, moonless night, right? And when you're hundreds of miles away from land, in the middle of the ocean, and you look up, and it might as well be day, because the stars and the whole Milky Way just opens up to you. And I'm telling you, you will never see anything like that, ever, because it was just so magnanimous, and it was just so powerful. And there's just no way that you could sit there and not believe that you were created, and all of this was created. And the power and the majesty of that is just absolutely amazing. And so every once in a while that would come into my mind. And so when I started actually searching and everything, I would start looking at his truth and trying to understand his truth, because for me, coming to Christ is based off of evidence. I'm an evidentialist. It's not that power of that beauty and everything. I mean, it made me aware of his existence, but that's not what brought me to him. It wasn't something that I was feeling. My faith is not primarily built off evidence, believe me. I mean, my experiences now are so much stronger and powerful because my faith has grown and increased, you know. And so, you know, all of that now is evidential to me, right? So even up here this today, me shaking my head like that, that's I'm feeling that evidence of his presence and his power inside me. And sometimes I don't understand that, you know, but I know what it is. I name it now. I know what that is because I've built up enough evidence in the past to understand that's him, right? So what brought me here is interesting. So I'm going to kind of fill you in on a little bit on that testimony. Jen A. Jen A. But that's not what brought me here. She's not what brought me here. So I as soon as I retired in 2011, then I went full time into becoming going for my bachelor's degree. I'd spent enough time traveling that I wanted to become a foreign service officer because I'd spent so many time at embassies and those foreign service officers would work with us. And I was like, man, this is a really good gig. You know, I really like this whole idea. And it's hard to get into foreign service. The foreign service officer's exam is incredibly tough. But anyway, so I went to school, finished my bachelor's degree in a year and a half. And then for 6 months, I worked this really crummy job. And about halfway through that, I decided to go back to school and get my master's degree. So my bachelor's degree is international studies, and my master's degree is in diplomacy. You know, with a concentration on conflict management and resolution. I wanted to go into the ambassadorial corps. So I made that decision go to grad school, and so that was online through Norwich University. So I was really frustrated and upset. I was not happy with the job that I was in, and I went back to my car one day during lunchtime, and I was sitting there just crying. And I didn't want to go back into my job. You know, I wanted to quit the job and leave. But I was at a point where I was just completely overwhelmed. And I didn't know what to do. And then this image popped into my mind of home here in Vermont and my parents. And I was sitting there going, well, that's the last thing I want to do, because me thinking like, oh, you know, going to Vermont, like that's failure. Yeah, I felt like that was failure, me personally, right? And while that image was in my mind, I audibly heard God tell me to go. It freaked me out. But I felt so compelled. There was so much power, and at this time too, I was living with a woman. We had been in a long relationship, which had been over, but it was still in the house, and so you know, I was like, okay, all right, well, I guess I'm supposed to go, and I called my dad, and you know, I was still overwhelmed and everything, and he said, why don't you come home? I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And I didn't say anything to him. Anyway, I went back into the job place, and I quit right then and there and went home. And yeah, I went home, and about an hour later, my dad calls me and says, hey, you know, if you want to come home, your aunt and her husband have an apartment that's open. It's yours. And I was like, you're kidding me, right? So I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing this and everything. And so I was like, I finally, that night, I think I finally just made the decision. I don't even know if I talked to you about that. Yeah, we did. Yeah, yeah. And which was, so for her, she spent she spent all of her school, her education in Virginia Beach, where I was living in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And so all of her education, Virginia Beach, she was getting during the summertime. This was August, July, end of July. Yeah, end of July. And she was going to go into her senior year of high school. And then she was not very happy, but yeah, you were ready to leave. Yeah, yeah. It was just a new adventure for you. Yeah. And so anyway, um, so I'm like, okay, well, we made the decision, and I I think I said 2 weeks for some reason. 2 weeks. I was like, okay, we're gonna be out of here in 2 weeks. I had two vehicles, and I only wanted to take one, um, and um, so I had this old Jeep, and then I had this old Chevy Cavalier and everything, and I was like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to sell one of these things, and I'm like, well, I'll put the car on Craigslist, and maybe it'll take a couple of weeks to get that sold. So I hope hopefully it doesn't extend me. You know, I want to be out of here in 2 weeks and everything, and and then also at the same time, my Jeep, the one that I wanted to keep, the head gasket was blown on it. So I had a really good friend of mine, and he said, "Hey, you know, I'm really good friends with this master Jeep mechanic and everything. He's agreed to, you know, take care of your vehicle for you, your Jeep for you and everything." And he said, and so I talked to the person, and then he's like, it's going to cost $900. I'll do it for $900." And I'm like, great. I'm like, where's the $900 going to come from? So anyway, I put the car on Craigslist, and I was thinking of putting it on. I was in the process of putting it on some other websites and everything. About a half an hour after I put the car on Craigslist, I got a reply, and about an hour after that, the person was in my driveway making me an offer for the car for $900. So I sold the car for $900 and paid the Jeep and everything else. Yeah, so I mean, like you can't make that stuff right, make that stuff up, right? So um, anyway, that 2 weeks we were up here, and I don't know who that person is over there, and I don't even know how I got online. We met online. We met online. And I don't know what she was doing online, and I don't know what I was doing online. We both didn't know what we were doing online, but for some reason, we connected, and we spent a month and a half, at least a month and a half. We would email each other. We didn't call each other or anything. We emailed each other for a month and a half, every night, and these long emails. How many pages? Two. Yeah, yeah. I think she still has. You still have all those, right? Yeah, yeah. And we just revealed ourselves to each other. And the beauty of that was, you know, well, if we're going to meet each other and start a relationship, well, now we have proof of people's proof of our backgrounds. You know, I mean, so evidential. I like evidence, right? And then we finally agreed to meet a month and a half. And we the old Woodnot bookshop. We met there for coffee on a Monday. On Monday, and then we went and had lunch with each other, and then yeah, and then we did some fall foliage, you know, leaf peeping and everything during that time, um, and then there was this about a month after that. There was well, a couple weeks after that, we made this trip to New Hampshire for a day trip, and we had quite the discussion on that trip. And we kind of realized that, well, this is a pretty serious relationship. And there was the question of like, well, if we were together, would we have, would I want kids? That was important to you. Church, right? And I think at that time I started. No, I didn't. It was after that. I was still in the so I was in the Episcopal Church, Lutheran Church, and the Episcopal Church for years, for a few, several years and everything before coming up here. And even when we lived in Hawaii, I was baptized in the Episcopal Church, and we spent some time, my ex-wife and I, in the Episcopal Church. But anyway, we decided we have to worship together. This just, if I'm going to have a relationship, that's the most important thing. We have to worship together. We're not going to spend time at this church or that church, or us separated from churches. And I wasn't quite happy with the Episcopal Church and where the direction of the Episcopal Church was going either. Especially the Episcopal Church I was going to. It was, yeah. I'll leave that to your imagination. So I ended up showing here. Well, that was in October, end of October. Yeah. And then I got the courage up to ask her to marry me. And that was December, Friday the 13th. We're funny. God's funny. But we were married in a very short period of time. We met in September, and we were married in May. And I remember at one point Jen was like, maybe I should probably start talking to my friends about this relationship that they don't know nothing about.
Just prior to getting engaged.
What did Megan do? Would you like?
Well, there was a lot of change going on, obviously. Was not expecting my dad to
Meet someone.
hop out of the frying pan and, right into Jen's arms. But when I officially met her, we went over for dinner, and he made us spaghetti. And I immediately loved her. Like, she was just the light of our family. You just changed everything, and all the doubts kind of went away. And I just trusted my dad, and I trusted you because I just had that feeling, and I guess that was God working in me a little bit. But it was definitely worth it, I think, coming up here, and for my dad especially. But
So that's a little bit about me. I have many stories to tell. And in building relationships with you, I am not ashamed of sharing anything of myself with you. And I know there's always been some kind of misconceptions with people about who I am and how to approach me. Obviously, humor is a strength of mine. I don't know if it's a defensive mechanism. It's not. It really isn't. I'm not an uncomfortable person. I'm a very open person, outgoing person with people, believe it or not. I'm very extroverted. But humor is definitely a strength of mine, unlike Gil's. He's very, very much a weakness for him. But yeah, I understand, how some people can kind of take me wrong, and I mean, honestly, I'm an open book. I got nothing to hide from you. I really don't. And yeah, you do. I love you, man. So why did I become a Christian? And so I'm going to just kind of break open that a little bit, because honestly, there was a discussion just within the past week or so that I had with somebody, and I wasn't able to explain it well enough, and I want another crack at that. And one of the main reasons that I became a Christian was, like I said, I'm an evidentialist. All right, it was not hard for me to get to God, to believe in a God, and I don't care what anybody says. Everybody knows that there's a God. Everybody knows there's a creator. And whether they want to suppress that truth or not, there is no atheist in a foxhole, right? And matter of fact, I think it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a believer in God, you know. And we've all heard that. But it did not take me much to build up the evidence to support my belief in a God and a creator. What a lot of people have a hard time to is going from God to Christ, okay? I've known many people that were in different religions, okay? And I'll tell you that one of the things that got me was understanding that every different religion or whatever, first of all, interesting enough, pretty much every major religion either has accepted, not accepted, has included Christ or has mentioned Christ in their religion. Every major one of them. Every major religion, whether that's mentioning him as a prophet, mentioning him as a very intellectual and moral person, or even including him as some kind of prophet or authority, believe it or not. And I'd love to be able to talk with you and show you some of that evidence, anytime in the future. But understanding that, hey, every religion looks at what has happened to the world, right? Sin has come into the world, as we know, with our Christian God, right? And every religion tries to figure out or tries to come up with a way to understand that and to reconcile it. But they can't. They can't. They'll come up with some other way for you personally, to rise above that. But there is no reconciliation with the idea of sin in this world and in ourselves. So that was interesting to me. And I'll tell you that the moral moral reasons to believe in God were very powerful for me at the time. Understanding that through morality we can prove that God exists, right? We all know that there is right and there's wrong. No matter how much we deny, evil, we all know that there is right things and there's wrong things. And that has broken the world and that has broken us. Okay? So that was very powerful for me. And then I came to the realization that Romans has a lot to say. Romans is, I've said for a long time, if I was stuck on deserted on an island and everything, and I can only have one book out of the Bible, and to help me explain that to my shipwrecked friend, it would be Romans. And I have to back up because you mentioned Romans 8. Therefore there is no condemnation in those in Christ Jesus, right? 8:1. And when I was first in the Navy, I graduated from boot camp, and I went to my A school as a music school, and I spent 6 months there. That was my first. I was actually saved within the first 3 or 4 months. 4 months of that school. through Campus Crusade. Yeah, and that was what did it for me was Romans 8:1. And I remember it was spring, and we actually it was during Easter, and we went to a bunch of there was 7 or 8 of us, I think, students, and the guy from Campus Crusade that was with us, his name was Steve Young, and I've tried to reach out to Steve Weber, I'm sorry, and I've tried to reach out to him and try to find him. I haven't been able to find him, and I know he had some health concerns and everything at the time too. So I don't know if he's since passed on or whatever. But I have a lot to owe him, and I did him wrong. I ended up not sticking with my faith after that. But I have a lot to be thankful for him. We ended up going into the mountains, the Shenandoah Mountains, during that Easter weekend, 3 or 4 day weekend or whatever, and we camped, and it was cold. And I ended up getting baptized in a stream there, and it was cold. It was cold. The goosebumps were not from the Holy Spirit. Yeah, so just back up on Romans 8:1. Thank you. So the whole moral existence, or the moral argument for the existence of God, has always been one of my favorites. So there's a lot of problems with the moral. It's not really the problems with the moral argument. It's going from God to Christ. Okay, and so one of the big problems about going from God to Christ and believing in Christ is this whole sense of justice and love. Okay, wrath and grace. That's hard. It's hard for a lot of people, especially someone who has a really strong sense of justice, or somebody who has a really strong sense of love. Because in this world, we live in this sinful world. We are permeated by sin. We were born into sin, right? There's no escape. We haven't escaped sin in this world in our lifetime, right? Constantly permeated with it. Our existence is outside of us and inside of us, right? So from that human perspective of sin and just being constantly bombarded with sin, our human perspective on God's wrath and God's grace seems very irreconcilable. And usually what we end up doing is we split God in half. And we accept one and reject the other. Okay? This is where we talk about the gospel. So somebody with a really strong sense of justice is going to gravitate towards the not understanding the love and the grace of God. Because when they see wrath, and I'll just go right here, Romans 1:18, if you want to follow along. For God, and so I didn't tell Jen what I'm talking about at all, and our whole worship set is about his wrath and his grace. The whole worship set, I was like, well, and then you guys, both of you started talking about it, and I'm like, well, why don't you guys just get up here and preach the dang message? Thanks. All three of you. Thank you. Yeah. So Romans 1:18, okay, for God's wrath is revealed from heaven, and I'm reading in the CSB, which is the Christian Standard Bible. I got this new Bible, and I love this Bible. It's the Apologetic Study Bible, and it's been a lot of fun. So for God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. That gives me, my radar goes ding. I kind of like seeking the truth. That's where I'm at. With authenticity. That is that is my target every time, is seeking the truth. Okay. Um, since what can be known about God is evident among them, because God has shown it to them, for his invisible attributes, that is his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. Now, that's where you can combine the moral argument for God. That's where you can combine the Kalam theory, which is God was created the universe, and through the creation of the universe, we can understand that God existed because he's outside of time, he's personal, and he's immaterial, right? And I could talk to you more if anybody's curious about any of these proofs of the existence of God. But this is where it is, and then we bring in the beauty aspect. Me standing out on the fantail of that ship and the moonless night, completely dark. And there's nothing but me and God right there. The beauty of his creation, right? Now, so when we talk about his wrath, we tend to start thinking about, well, God's wrath is this uncontrollable emotion that he has, to punish somebody and to send them to hell and everything. And I've always argued that God doesn't send you to hell. You send yourself there. But this understanding of wrath, right? It's his just and holy response, to sin and rebellion. That's what his wrath is, right? So that requires justice, right? His wrath comes out of his justice. And it seems like there's conflict between that and his love, which grace comes out of, right? So that person who sits there and goes, well, I can't understand this because this is an unloving God. If he's going to send people to hell to punish them for their sins and everything, well, that's an unloving God. That is not a good God, right? And so, that whole idea, well, what about that person who's never heard of Christ? And why does it have to always go through Christ? If we don't understand this is a punishing God, he is not a good God. And so I can't believe in a God that would send people to hell. You hear that all the time, right? Right. Well, my response to that is, well, what kind of a good God would not punish somebody, right? Now, I'm a parent. I have my children. If they do things that are not good and I do not punish them, am I being a good father? Right? So with that, they start to gravitate towards, okay, all right, so I'm rejecting that. Now I'm going to accept that God is love. He's a loving God now, because a loving God wouldn't send people to hell. A loving God would lavish his love over people and let them be who they are. Now, that's where you get these people that believe that I can do no wrong. Right. Anything goes, because God loves me, and he loves me so much that he's not going to send me to hell. So now you've taken away wrath, and you've taken away the idea of hell. Right? Now, on the other hand, right, we talked about being just completely love. Right. We talked about getting rid of hell and so forth. Now, for that person, now that there's no punishment, okay, that's a difficult conversation to have with. But on the other side, if you have somebody that understands wrath, and his righteousness, the righteousness of God, and justice, knowing that that we all have fallen short of the glory of God, right? That we all sin, and that there's punishment for that. Now we have the other half, where that punishment and that understanding that righteousness of God, now that takes us away from a loving God. That takes us away from the idea that grace does not exist. We have a hard time with accepting God's grace out of understanding that punishment, right? His righteousness, his justice. Okay? But as we know, as most of you know, and if you don't know, please understand that God did reconcile. And this is one of the major reasons that I accepted Christ, because of this. If you go to Romans 3:21. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been revealed, attested by the law and the prophets. The righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe, since there is no distinction. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God presented him as the mercy seat by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his restraint, God passed over the sins previously committed. And right there, he's talking about some of the people that he favored throughout time, right? Abel, Enoch, Moses, so forth. He held his judgment on them, knowing that the plan was in place for Christ's resurrection, right? That's what he's talking about there. God presented him to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so that he would be just and justify the one, or just and the justifier, who has faith in Jesus. The just and the justifier. He is talking about the reconciliation of his just and wrath and his love and grace right there through Christ, okay? He did so on the cross. He presented his entire wrath of the sins from the past and all the sins that will ever be right there on the cross, okay? And in doing so, Jesus bore those. And now we have grace, because there was a price that was paid for that grace to be able to come through, which is freely given. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about that, all right? Because you will have some people that will say, what kind of horrible father, right, would send his son to such a horrific death? It's a horrible father that would do that. I want to be able to introduce the idea, if it hasn't come to you already, that when Christ was on that cross, when Christ was suffering for each and every single one of us, right? God and the Holy Spirit were not separated from that suffering. We believe in a triune God, right? What's that? Yeah. 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 It's God himself, the incarnate God. That's what she said. And so he's not distinct from that suffering. And it was in that suffering where he was able to understand what we were going through, and understand that that plan in place, for our salvation was possible. Okay? Another thing to consider is God's holiness and the offensiveness of sin to him, to understand his wrath. I've always said that God can't be near sin, and I've tried to talk to this about people, and I've always never been able to describe it well. I always say something like, God just can't be in the same room as sin, essentially, because it's so counter to who He is, right? And it's irreconcilable. He can't be near sin and everything, and how that we're trying to push. He's trying to push that away, but His wrath, of course, is that natural reaction to sin that has to be completely and fully punished, right? And that's what elicits His wrathful response, right? But then understand, that God has, He has, this incredible, unlimited love for us. And having a conversation with somebody just a little while ago, the question was, okay, well, all right, I understand what you're saying and everything, but, if God is who He is and everything, I mean, why can't He just snap His fingers and get rid of all of this? And I said He did. He did. It's the only way it could be done. The only way. Because in order for grace, there has to be a price paid for that grace. And so now your wrath and your grace is reconciled through Him, right? And then you'll have these people that will say, well, was Jesus made to go through that? No. He voluntarily did it, right? Turn to John 10. John 10, starting at verse 14. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep. But I have other sheep that are not from this sheep pen, and I must bring them also. And they will listen to my voice. Then there will be one flock, one shepherd. This is why the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own. I have the right to lay it down, and I have the right to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. So it was eternally agreed upon before everything. Before everything was created, this plan was in place. And that is how much He loves us. That He laid down everything for us. That He, the creator of us, decided to come down and humble Himself and take on everything that we are in our suffering. So I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that reconciliation between wrath and grace. And I think this is where I'm going to end it. But what I want to do is we'll move this table away and everything. And for those of you that are still struggling with that whole idea of wrath and grace and having a hard time reconciling that, if there's anybody who has not accepted Christ, I'm going to have Gil and Aaron, pastors, would you mind coming up? Jim, would you mind coming up as well to pray? And let me have Nancy and Brian. Would you mind coming up as well? And of course, Jen with me. we're gonna be up here for prayer, and of course, anything that you want to pray for, we'll pray for, and so forth. But if you still have questions, and you still have that beating heart inside of yours that is still having a hard time reconciling this, and if there's anybody here who has not fully accepted that and accepted Christ, we're here and we want you to come up.